All right, we'll get started. Jack White will be joining us shortly. Welcome, everybody. Great to see a great turnout on the first afternoon of When Words Collide. My name is Virginia O'Dine. I will be this session's moderator. I'm with Bundoran Press. I'll be around all weekend. You can feel free to talk to me at any time. We also have a monster of a launch party tonight at 9 p.m. Everyone's welcome. I will briefly introduce my fellow panelists, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. Stephen Owad, please tell us about yourself.
I am a local boy. I write crime novels. My third novel is just coming out right now, entitled Hard Currency, and it's for sale at the Owl's Nest table in the other room. My roots are in journalism. I've spent 20 years editing journalism, editing fiction, and these days I'm a financial editor just because it pays better than journalism and fiction. So that's me in a nutshell.
I am Susan McGregor. I'm a fiction editor with On Spec magazine, also a writer in my own right, and currently have my fingers and toes crossed because my agent has my novel with about a dozen publishing houses in New York, even as we sit here. So send me good wishes.
I'm Neil Godbout. My second novel with Bundoran Press, that would be Virginia's press, has just come out. Dissolve and the first book, Disintegrate, are also available in the in that buying area. You know, I also come from a journalism background, although still am in journalism because I found the way to make money in journalism was to move into management.
Nice.
So I'm the managing editor of the daily newspaper in Prince George, BC.
Okay, so today's session is on editing your own work. Editing your own work is exponentially harder than editing other people's work because your brain expects to see what you believe is there. So we'll just go down the line. We'll do a little bit of personal experience, maybe some tips and tricks to make the process a little easier.
Okay, well, first of all, I could give you a million tips and tricks. But first of all, the main thing to know is that if you don't edit it yourself, it's not going to get done. The days of sending your manuscript to a publisher and having some editor in New York or Toronto or wherever fix your script and call you up and walk you through revisions, they're not completely gone, but there's not a lot of them left. Even my three novels that were published, after my first two novels were published, I decided to go to a different publisher, and one of the reasons was that I wanted more editorial feedback. So I went to a bigger house. They subcontracted the editing. It was very professionally done. Not a lot of feedback there either. So it's just not going to happen. You just have to do it yourself. And once you realize that that's the truth, you'll be better off, I think.
We're all really blind to our own work, and so it's very difficult unless you have an outside person kind of taking a look and giving you a guiding hand. It's really tough to know what to do. However, that said, I am not an organic writer. I know some people work that way, but for me, the first step in editing my own work starts before I even start writing the story. And that is what I do is I either put down an outline, usually if it's a novel, I'll write it out, and I'll spend maybe 2 to 3 weeks planning the novel before I actually start the writing. If it's a short story, I usually just put the outline in my head. So all of that structural stuff is done before I actually sit down at my laptop and get busy. From that point, you can kind of look at the structure, because I think you have to start with the bones of whatever it is you're writing, and structure is the bones. So you need to understand where the first plot point is, where the major changes are happening, and how you want your climax to hit. All of those things you need to have in mind before you begin. Then once you get it down, then it's a matter of just slogging through, getting that first draft down, and from that point on, then looking at the work with a more detailed eye, tightening it. My last novel that I did, I had my agent looked at it, thank gosh, a number of times. I had to go through the process several times. So what I'm telling you is the process that I went through for it. But the very last revision that I went, she said, okay, now go through and I'd done 3 revisions at this point. She said, go through it one more time, look at every single word in every single sentence. Now, we're talking a 112,000-word novel, and I'm going, no, please, no. Make sure every word you choose is the word you mean to use there. Tighten it wherever you can. Get rid of passive voice if you can. Make it active. Get rid of lulls. Okay, that's more structural, but I ended up cutting off 12,000 words out of that novel and not making a big difference in the actual story, except now it reads a lot faster and a lot tighter. So those are the things that you can think of. Consider structure first, and then move to the finer detail as you go along.
Virginia can speak to this better as my editor and publisher, but I have the opposite problem of Susan. I write like a journalist. I tend to write very short, very tight, and then Virginia sends me revisions and says more, more, more. And so both Dissolve and Disintegrate are about 69,000 words. They started life at about 60,000. And Dissolve, the editing was 5 new chapters. So for me, writing and editing are interchangeable. I don't see one. I don't see the process as 2 separate processes. Okay, I've written. Okay, now I have to sit down and edit. The whole process for me is writing, is fixing it, is changing. I think of it in the same way. I have a friend who's a session musician in Vancouver, and he said it's music whether you're recording the bass track or you're recording, you're adding some little thing at the final production level. It's all about making music, and so I've really taken that thought to heart in that writing and editing. And so when I hear writers and people saying, oh God, I'm in the editing phase and it's such hard work. Well, you're not in the editing phase, you're still in the writing phase. You're constantly in the writing phase. Editing is just that box I think we've created for ourselves to say this is the hard work that has to be done before you're finished writing. So that's how I feel about writing and editing.
I love the editing phase because the writing phase, the first draft phase for me is the hardest. Even if I have an outline, I'd way rather edit. I can edit till the cows come home, using that old cliche. But the first draft, that's like slogging through the woods with a machete, trying to get it to work. So.
Editing. I've been around for longer than any of you, I think. For me, the editing process is when you pick up a book you wrote 20 years ago and you open it at random and say, oh shit, I can't believe I said that. It never stops. And my books I write big books. 200 to 250,000 words. And my writing process it's almost unicellular. I write until I reach the end of the section I'm working on, and then I print it off, and because I'm an old school teacher, I do the blue pencil edit then. And I go back and I input it. And any novel of mine that you pick up, there will be sections in there that I may have rewritten 10 to 15 times. But it never stops. But the best tip I ever got in my life for editing, the body of the work, came from an American writer. He said, what I do, he said, when I get a piece that bothers me, he said, I write the thing down, then I get myself a tape recorder and I just read it out loud. And when I'm driving, I put it in my slot in the car and I listen to it. And I tried it. It is absolutely infallible. You gotta know how to read in the first place. But I pop a cassette into my car and I'll be driving anywhere and listening. And I'm concentrating on driving, but the words are there. The mistakes, the weaknesses, the flaws just leap out and nail you. They hit you right in the middle of the forehead. And you say, uh-oh, and that means, write it again, son. So you might want to try that. If something you've really been struggling with, record it and listen to it. And you'll be amazed at what you hear, because it's very different to what you see. And yet the two are one. Okay.
I think often as writers, we forget that what we're doing, we want it to come from the heart and soul and pour out of us like divine intervention or something. But what we're doing is a craft, and we're constantly working to improve our craft. We don't hire a carpenter to come into our house and have them ask us how to do it. If you're submitting work, I recently had a submission that was just loaded with typos and grammatical errors, and I was told, well, that's what editors are for. I'm not doing the job of the writer. This is your job. My job is to take something that is 99% wonderful and make it 110% wonderful. I have a couple little tricks here that I've heard that some people love for editing your own work. One is to start line by line and work backwards, because it's shifting your brain out of getting stuck in reading mode, and you're looking at it backwards. Sometimes people change the background color on their document. Sometimes people change the font. So once again, your eye and your brain is kind of startled out of what it's usually looking at. For substantive editing, one of my favorite tricks is I have kind of a bulleted synopsis of each section, not just chapter, but section in my stories. And it's one line for each section. This character, this happens. This object, whatever might be new to that setting. And then I can look back at it and go, oh, I put this in chapter 2, and I'm at chapter 18, and I completely forgot about it. Right? Just those little details as you're plundering your way through a novel that may get missed. Or if you're like me, the 7-year novel that just doesn't end. So there's, even if you search online, you're going to find a bazillion tricks that will help you to edit your own work. I'll let somebody speak on the value of other people editing your own work and what you can take out of that or not take.
The value of getting someone else, an outsider, to read your work? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, it's immeasurable, but you have to make sure you have the right outsider read your work.
That's true.
Don't use somebody in your family. Don't use your friends, unless you have a friend who's a really good editor and is not afraid of hurting your feelings. But even they will feel the pressure to soften the blow. What you want is a trusted reader. You want someone who is not necessarily an editor. Editors aren't the only ones who can tell you whether your work is good or not. What you need is someone who maybe likes to read in your genre, somebody who is willing, number one, to spend the time on it. It's a chore to go through somebody's manuscript. Screenplays, you read them in a couple hours, boom, you're done, you go for a beer and talk about it. Novels, you have to spend a lot of time reading it, and if you find someone who's willing to do it, appreciate it, really. And when they give you their feedback, if they say something negative, nod your head, smile politely, even if you don't agree with it, even if you think they're out in left field. You don't have to make any changes that they may suggest if they're going to suggest changes, but write it down, keep it, and if somebody in the future makes the same comment, you've got corroboration. Then you know you've got a problem. And it's usually almost always the type of thing that you as yourself, as your own reviser, as your own editor, you're not going to pick up on it. You're going to be too close to the work no matter how many tricks of objectivity you might try. And I've got a few tricks. One was mentioned, different, read backwards, different font, different background. I like to go to some place different, print it out, wait a while after you finish your first draft. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, doesn't really matter. Then read it in that different setting on a different format, hard copy. That works. But like I say, the value you're going to get from someone else rather than from your own mind is immeasurable.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what you said. It's very important who you get to critique your work. I think I said that in the panel prior to this one. If possible, get somebody you respect. If you've read their work, if they're willing to give you the time, then listen to what they have to say. I wouldn't I don't put a lot of value in people who are not writing at my level. I don't think they have, certainly as readers, they'll have their opinion, but in order to make me a better writer, point out my errors, I'm not convinced that they have the ability to do that. The best outside assistance I have received to date was with my current agent. I began a dialogue with her about 5 years ago. I sent her my manuscript. She rejected it, but I asked her why. And so she gave me some very basic things to think about, and I went ahead and rewrote the thing and approached her again and said, how'd you like to take a second look at this? I took your advice. I did this, and this. She said, yeah, sure, I'd love to take a look. So she read it, didn't offer me a contract, but we had a conversation. And she said, okay, well, this is working, but, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? So I said, well, I will certainly go and do those things. So I did. And, after a time, she finally said, yes, this is really working. I think we need to talk about a contract. So, I respect her opinion hugely. She's well thought of in the industry, and I consider myself extremely lucky to have her assistance. She opened my eyes to a lot of the things that I was doing. One minor thing that I do is I have favorite words that I don't realize I use all the time. So what I do is I, highlight that word, and then I do a search for the word throughout the rest of the manuscript. And sometimes you'll find, oh, cripes, you put the same word in the second paragraph following it. You've got to. That's a really small tip, but that's something that you can do. If you know there's a favorite word that you have, just go and look for them. Or if you have a favorite tense form that you like to use, like could or can, or all those sort of compound tenses that are better, perhaps put in a more active way. You can do searches for those things like that and clean them up that way too.
It's a great tip.
Excuse me. One of the things that, besides read backwards, that I've done is I've printed off the whole thing. This is usually kind of second revision. Printed off the whole thing and then play 52 pickup with basically throw the whole thing in the air and then read it completely randomly from page to page. Very valuable for what Susan was just talking about picking on little tricks that you like to use and you use them a little too much because you get it works once, it works twice, and you think, well, it'll work 10 times. Well, after about the 5th time, it doesn't really work anymore. It loses its sparkle. And so I think that murdering your darlings, if you will, stop being, stop marveling in your own genius and move on to the next thing. So I've done that. And also that throwing the pages up in the air exercise for me, it's actually about seeing my work as disposable. And I know that's a little harsh, but I work in newspapers. I mean, we create a new product 6 days a week, and so I think I already bring a fairly healthy skepticism to my own work in terms of editing it, and so I think I'm pretty harsh on myself. And so when I do that exercise of throwing it up in the air, I really see it as, okay, I have to see this as brand new, but as something that, like, if this is going to be something worth someone's time, that it better sing. And so if it can sing out of order, then hopefully it'll sing in order too.
But I'm not sure that would work for Jack, because if you got 200,000 words and you're throwing it up, someone's going to have to clean it up, right? Yeah.
Do you have any tricks, Jack?
No. I find I thrive on sheer terror when I look at what I've written and what I have to generate. No, write it, get it out, and then print it off in hard. I cannot edit on a screen, and I just cannot do it. But thank God I've got an absolutely magical copy editor who stuns me every time he works on my material, because he does the highlighting thing. He'll go through and he highlight not just the same word use, but he'll go through and he will highlight gradations of that word, shades, and he'll show you the frequency because he highlights them all. And at that point, I invariably realize how important vocabulary is to a writer. It's something that a lot of writers don't think about. But vocabulary is your basic stock in trade. And the more words you have at your disposal, the less chance you have of falling into that overuse syndrome, this pattern of using the same expressions over and over again. It's tough to build vocabulary, but it's doable. It can be done. All you got to do is spend 70 years at it, the way I do.
There's a great bit of software Dave Duncan put me onto it. It's called WordWeb, and it's a dictionary. And they do have a free version and a beefier paid-for version. But it's got a hotkey, so what I have it set up as is you put your mouse. You put your mouse into the word. You don't have to highlight the word. Control right-click, and it brings up that word in the dictionary. Fast, fast, fast. So I can try to find synonyms or something else. Because I'm one of the writers who I know this word and it's not right, and it breaks my flow, but I have to have the right word right then, right there. And this little tool was fantastic.
Like revolving and rotating.
Yes, thanks, Jack.
We had an instance of that yesterday in a piece that Virginia had written, and she talked about a rotating door. She meant a revolving door. And there's a difference. Rotating goes upside down.
One of the funniest ones I've seen, my author Hayden Trenholm, it got all the way to the proof copy from the press, and the bad guys were storming into the building with baklavas on their head.
With a C or a K?
It was baklava. It was not a balaclava, it was a baklava. Yeah, so you never know.
Well, I mean, and it's ridiculous, but this type of thing happens all the time. I wrote, for example, one thing that never got caught in one of my books was that I wrote about a wild boar in Europe. Wild boars. I'm thinking of wild boars. It was just one small image on the page, but for whatever reason, when I wrote it, I wrote warthog. Not a lot of those in Northern Europe. I didn't catch it. The editor didn't catch it, the copy editor didn't catch it, and I didn't catch it on my last read-through. So it ended up as warthog on the book, on the page. So these things do happen all the time, no matter how silly they are. You get the wrong word in your head, and you may not see it because you wrote it.
I really love writing on a computer because if a lot of what I write is it's set in Europe, so I have to be very cautious. My main character is a bit of a herbalist, so I had to be very careful with the kind of herbs that she uses because some of them are not old world herbs, they're new world herbs, and so I'm constantly, I'll write something and go, oh, wait, that might not be right. So right away I do like you do, Virginia. You're looking for the word. I'm looking for the to see if what I want to use there works. And so I'm back and forth between Google and my writing all the time.
If I can touch on just one other thing about trusted readers, beta readers, if you will, to look at your work. One thing that worked for me with working on my first book, Disintegrate, before finding a publisher was I took it to people who I knew wouldn't like it because they just don't like that type of genre. Because I knew that they would read it far more for the story, and they wouldn't get hopefully too hung up in the paranormal side of it about or in also writing young adult. It's young adult urban fantasy. So I had 3 people in Prince George read it, and 3 successful, I would say, to various degrees, three successful writers, and I completely agree with Susan, find someone to write or someone to look at your work whose writing you is at least at the level of yours. Mm-hmm. So in the case of these three women, they hate genre fiction. Well, I shouldn't say that. Two of them hate genre fiction. One of them actually didn't get through my book, but still had really...
What's wrong with her?
It was in the pages weren't in the right order after we picked them up.
Yeah, exactly. But she writes literary fiction. She works for the CBC, so maybe that explains everything. But anyway, but she writes literary fiction. She takes herself and her work very seriously. She couldn't get through it, but she still gave me some very good points that I hadn't thought of. And then someone who does write genre fiction looked at the structure of my book and went, you can't do this. You can't have characters, multiple points of view. Pick one. And for me, like, I really struggled with that, and so I had to go back to the very basic, is why am I telling this story in multiple points of view? And then, okay, if I'm going to do that, then I need to find a way to make it less confusing. So, I mean, she really forced me to go right back to the basics, and that's what having people who will maybe tell you things that you don't want to hear about your work can really help you move forward.
I did that with my novel. I had 8 points of view in it, and that was one of the things I was told to get rid of. So I had to look and see which points of view were absolutely necessary to tell my story, and I ended up with 3.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions? There's a great amount of people here. It's fantastic to see.
Virginia, I write historicals as a rule, and I just had a partial come back to me. One of the comments was, because I tried to deduct the source thing, right, trying to get new words, increase the... And she came back, and she's read all my books, and she says, that isn't you. That word, you have 3 words in this submission. That totally isn't your voice. So is there not a fine line, too, between trying to increase your vocabulary and trying to keep it true to what your voice is?
It would depend on if it's your voice. Your character's voice is way easier to nail. And your voice, if you... one way you'll tell that is by reading it out loud and checking the rhythm. That's probably why it tweaked her. Was you have a rhythm, and all of a sudden there's this clunky, different word that just stands out. Like we had an example in the writer's workshop where the main character said something about his head was lolling, but in his dialogue he said something like "right good." So those were 2 totally different styles. So it's just a matter of checking your rhythm. And seeing if are you using too obscure of a word. I just read one of Diana Gabaldon's books, and she had like 5 words in there I've never heard before. I almost threw it across the room. I consider myself a smart person, but I was like, what?
5 consecutive words?
No. So they're usually easy to spot. So it's not getting carried away with, I've used this word in the last chapter, I need something new. It's just watching that pacing and that rhythm. Anybody else? Way over there.
Hoping for tips on finding and combating the pesky passive voice.
Tips on finding and combating the pesky passive voice. Don't use the passive voice.
Look for the word of. You can just program your computer, your word processor, to look for the word of. That's usually a dead giveaway of passive voice. Active verbs. If your sentence has was, were, is, if it has a lot of gerunds, if it has a lot of INGs, it's likely, well, not likely, but it could have something wrong with it. And you really have to go on a line-by-line basis with this, word-by-word basis, because, for every rule there's an exception. So passive voice is not always 100% wrong, but coming out of the School of Journalism, for me, it makes me ill to see passive voice anywhere almost. So the word of is a big giveaway.
You can also just look for action, reaction. right? That's a pretty easy one, is look at your sentence. What is happening? Who's it happening to? Which order is more exciting?
And then another thing I'd throw in is this helps somewhat with passive and active voice, is to see if you can write it without adverbs. And it's, well, for one thing, very should just, as a word, should just be banned.
It's very bad.
It's very lazy, is what it is. It's find the verb that you're looking for that means very whatever it is you're trying to say. So really watch the adverbs, because that's when you start getting into really lazy use of verbs. And to me, that's what starts bringing on the passive voice, is that laziness. It's writing's hard work. We all know it, and so that's, I think, how passive voice creeps in.
Yeah, especially ly adverbs.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that ends in ly, it can almost always, 99% of the time, it should go with prejudice.
I will use the word very once in my novel, just to be difficult, and I will probably put it in dialogue, but nowhere else. The other thing that occurred to me is watch. One of my bad habits is when I initially write something, I use a lot of blocking. He turned, she smiled, and then when I go through and edit, I get rid of a lot of that stuff because you really don't need it. The dialogue, can probably handle a lot of that kind of blocking.
Anna?
There's a little book by Ken Rand called The 10% Solution, and I think it covers a lot of what you're saying. I'm not sure how many people here have heard of it. I don't know if Patrick Swinson brought any copies of them. They are there? Okay, so if you go into the
It's gonna sell out.
there's one available, but it has all kinds of tips. What they're talking about putting in bad words for you in your search engine. You just make your list of all these steps you're going to do it in your writing, and goes through it. And
It's called The 10% Solution.
by, I think it's Ken Rand, right? Is that his name?
Ken Rand.
Yeah.
So is his point that when you edit, you should lose 10% of your... Yeah.
Cut 10% out.
It's easily done.
Yeah, and if they run out at Firewood Press, you can go online to FictionWise and buy it for like $2 or $3 to download it. So it's the cheapest editor you'll ever get, and it's phenomenal because he's got like about 3 pages of the words to avoid and to tighten up your sentences.
Yeah, and if you can't get it there, since we're plugging books and services, there's a fantastic book, some of you may have it or have read it. It's Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. It's short, it's like 150 pages, written by Brown and King. I don't know their first names, but I've read it a few times. I read it every 3-4 years. It's very, very easy to understand. It's in layman's language. It's for the commercial writer. It's indispensable, I think.
Another great exercise is I entered a writing contest, and the limit was 500 words. And what the hell? And I wrote this piece, and I was at 850. And it was okay to get it down to about 700, and then I struggled. But you know what? It was way more amazing story at 500 words than at 750, because you look at this and you realize how much is extraneous and slows down the action and detail that just doesn't necessarily add anything. And I won first place, so I was all happy. Yay. But even if you take a page of your work, try it. Take a page of your work, and if your page is single-spaced, 500 words, cut it down to 300, and just try that exercise, and you'll probably be really surprised.
You just reminded me of something. When I was a kid in school, before most of you were born, it was a given part of the English course that because you were in an academic stream in high school, you had to accept as a given that anything you wrote could be shortened by 1/3. And we took lessons for years on the art of précis. You write something, and then you cut it by 1/3, and then you write it again, and you cut it by 1/3, and you can do it time after time after time. And the beautiful part is, even if you do it 100 times, you still get a few letters left. But it works. It teaches you to just strip out the extraneous and go for the meat of what you're trying to say. It's a fabulous exercise. So anything you're looking at, try and write it. If it's 900 words or 1,000 words, try and write it in 600. And do it again. You'll be amazed at how much you learn the second time.
That's the thing I tell the reporters that work for me in the newsroom. Go ahead and write your story. I unlike a lot of newspaper editors, I don't set a limit for them in terms of the length of their news stories. But what I do tell them is be prepared to lose a third of it, and that's actually the exact fraction I use, is that be prepared that if the bottom third of the story gets cut off, that your story still stands. And every once in a while you still get a reporter coming to complain, you cut the bottom of my story. Well, you knew it was going to get, or could get cut. So live with that.
We had a question over there a long time ago. Yes?
It was on rhythm and dialogue. We're just touching on it. I personally struggle with dialogue a lot, with rhythm and dialogue. In particular, if I've got two female characters and two similar characters who are conversing with each other, trying to make their voices separate and independent from each other without getting overly verbal. And I'm just wondering if any of you have any suggestions for developing separate voices of two characters with similar traits or similar backgrounds.
The most important thing is to know your characters very well. Know that they're different. Know where they come from. Know how they speak. They will sound different on the page if you are bringing up all that you know in the patterns of their speech. If they both come from the Bronx, born in 1960, both went to the same school, they said they're both WASPs, it's going to be difficult, but there's still going to be some differences. There's going to be some personality differences deep within the character, or hopefully on the surface of the characters for the purposes of fiction and conflict. But they're going to be there, and you just have to mine those. Simply, that's it. I don't know. There might, you guys might have some tricks for this particular issue, but I think it comes down mainly to knowing the characters.
Think about, your best friend or a good friend might be a lot like you, but if you're speaking, people are going to know the difference between you two. Why? Because there'll be little quirks. Your personality is different. You'll get a lot better rhythm through that personality in your work, because they're going to be saying different things, even if they're kind of similar people to an extent. So really look at what they're saying as well, what they want out of what they're doing, and that will help. Susan, anything?
I kind of went blank for a minute there. Dialogue. I write my dialogue just as it comes out, and then I will look at it and I will say what is absolutely crucial to move this scene forward, or what is crucial to show an aspect of character here. A lot of the time in my dialogue, I may have repeated something, 4 or 5 lines down the way. So I will take the weaker piece of dialogue out, or combine it in some way. So my dialogue always serves a purpose. It's not just chatting back and forth. And I think that the comments also said about character are really important. If you've developed your characters really strongly, they will be. You have to think of them in terms of being different from one another. Even if their background is similar, they have to be different emotionally, different in their drives, their motivations, what they think is important, their values. And if you determine those things, then the dialogue, you'll distill it down, it'll serve the purpose that it needs to serve, and it'll move the story forward as well as illuminate character.
Our dialogue expert, Jack, anything?
Nothing that hasn't been said. You got to know your character. I personally base my even minor characters on people I know, and I don't choose people because of their characters. I choose them because of characteristics that I can hang a hook on, or that I can hang something on. Facial tics and conversational tics. Everybody has a different way of speaking. Everybody phrases things differently from anyone else. It's cadence, intonation, rhythm, and tempo. It's just that natural flow is there in every human voice. The trick for the author or the writer is to be able to capture the differences there and to put them across. And if your characters fit comfortably within the situation in which you've placed them, that should come naturally, providing you know your characters well enough. Because you'll hear them in your head. So, if you hear them with different voices, they'll speak with different voices.
And if they always sound the same, if this is a recurring problem, then maybe you have one too many characters in your story.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing to look at in revision.
Bam!
And then the other thing too is that the other one of my main characters, Sam, in Disintegrate, he says "yeah, sure" a lot, and that's the thing. That's a natural part of speaking. We all sort of fall back when we don't know what to say. We often fall back on these little catchphrases of 1 or 2 or 3 words to just sort of break up the silence if you're uncomfortable with that or whatever. So I've used that. Try not to use it too much. But then also, if there's a passage of time, people don't hold on to those phrases forever. Our vocabularies and the way we speak are constantly, they're dynamic, they're constantly changing. And so if you do have a passage of time, make sure that the character isn't saying "yeah, sure" or whatever a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, because to me that's it doesn't fit anymore.
Characters are all going to react differently emotionally to the same situation, or I think they should, and that will help determine what they say. So you might have, one character, the same background, but one character who is determined to do something, and another character who doesn't really think it's a good idea, or maybe she's a little bit more nervous, or maybe she's got an agenda. So those deeper motivations are going to drive the dialogue.
Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about foreign language and when is it appropriate to introduce words from another language? That's number one. Number two is when you do introduce it, how do you translate it without using footnotes?
Well, I can take that because the novel that I just finished is set in Poland with Polish characters, and I introduced a lot of Polish phrases and words throughout the text. I would say you introduce it only if it's necessary, if it's whatever that may mean to you as the writer, if it is clear to the reader within the context of the sentence. If it's something that's going to send the reader to a dictionary, you might not want to do it because it just removes them from the story. Anything that is hard to understand or exotic for the sake of exotic, it's not good enough. It just doesn't serve the purpose of conflict in fiction. So when I was writing this last novel, I had all sorts of Polish phrases and words that were just so cool in the early drafts. I got rid of probably 90% of them, and I kept on, policji for police, because everyone knows what it is, or milicja for militia, because everyone knows what it is. So I would caution against adding too many foreign words, simply because it's a fairly transparent and often misguided way to prove to the reader that you know what you're writing about, or that it actually takes place in this particular place and time. If the conflict is set up correctly, if the setting is there, then you don't really need to lard the language with foreign words.
I like using them because I think that some will color your novel. It'll give it more of a stronger sense of place. But I'm also careful with how I use them. For example, I might write about a gypsy Vardo. Well, what the heck is a Vardo? But within the sentence that follows, I'll say the wagon was painted, so I'll kind of describe it. I'll lead the writer along to understand what Vardo means. So the next time they see that word, it means gypsy caravan, right? I'll use Spanish terms of endearment. Obviously, if a man is talking to, mi ciela, or mi cielo, come with me, or whatever. Terrible dialogue, just right there. But, it's obvious that cielo is an endearment term, right? So, the things that I use are obvious. They add a little color. And some words I think most people will know, like casa, well, it's a house, right? So.
And on other occasions when you do have to use it, and when I have used foreign phrases, I'm not afraid of just having my characters in a conversation. One of them will use an expression like that, a foreign expression. The other one will look at him and say, "What the hell's that?" And then he explains. He said, oh, well, where I come from, that's what we call it, and it means bang, bang, bang. And then you can use it again if you have to, and the reader won't question it. So,
Sorry, I have another question.
yeah.
For very common words like mom and dad, if the Chinese family, should I use mom and dad, or we change the way to say mom and dad? Because this one critic said, well, if you use mom and dad, that sounds way too North American. But to me, it's very universal. And
Yes, it is.
like, how do you decide on that? What is the line?
I would say go with, if you know that it's universal, right? I personally wouldn't know that. I have to do research. Then stick with what you know. And if you're comfortable with it and you can back it up, then use it. When you're getting your stuff critiqued, you're going to get, out of 10 people, 6 will say the same thing, 4 will say something else. So you have to decide what works in the end.
Yes, you do. And it's like grandpapa and grandmama. You know, it differs from country to country. I've got friends in Kelowna who have a little grandson who calls them Upa and Uma. Now, these words are, you hear them in conversation, you know exactly what's involved from the context that you find yourself in, or the situation you find yourself in. When you're writing about it, be blatant, and then if you need to, just explain it. Oh, they're German. You know, that's the German word for grandpa. Yeah. And even the English word for grandpa can be confusing. Is it grandpa, or gramps? Or there's a dozen variants. It's all idiomatic, and so you have to trust yourself and trust your reader.
Okay, a couple more questions.
Yeah, I just thought with regards to dialects or accents and sort of thing in fiction. Like a lot of the stuff I write tends to be dialogue heavy, so I'm torn sometimes between how much I'm going to add in contractions to represent what the character sounds like versus making it more readable, that sort of thing. How do you deal with that balance?
That's a train spotting question.
Yeah.
I mean,
Definitely. Yeah.
you know, you read Train Spotting, and it's, I mean, the whole novel's, written like that, and it's a challenge to read too.
Yeah, be careful. You're talking about my home country.
I know. but it. So I mean, you have to ask yourself. I mean, what's your purpose? I mean, to me, with Train Spotting is that Irvin Welsh was trying to put everyone there, and so okay, that serves that purpose. Is it challenging to read? Yes, it's challenging to read, but I think he wanted everyone to hang on to what the characters were saying and really digest what the characters were saying. So,
yeah, and I think dialect is something that you can easily reach for out of kind of desperation, but often it's simpler to just write normal words in the speech pattern that the person of that dialect would use. Toni Morrison does this really well. The words are there. You know that this person is from this particular milieu, but every word is just a normal denotative word that everyone uses. So again, it's a similar comment I would say that I gave to this lady here, in that dialect can be like using foreign language. It can be something that puts the reader at a remove or makes them work too hard to understand the story. And there are some masters at it who can really do it exceptionally well, but masters are few and far between.
Yeah. Respect your reader in it. Too much, it can be too clever, and it won't work for everybody.
And it's extremely difficult to do, too.
Yeah. Good.
I was wondering, how do you decide when something is as finished as you make it?
It's never finished. It's only published. It's play is never done. It's only produced.
Why do you think George Lucas keeps remaking the Star Wars movies? I mean, seriously, he looks back at what he made 25, 30 years ago, and he still sees things he wants to change. I mean, that's absolutely true. It's not finished. It's only published.
I guess that's the question. Yeah. How do you decide though when to let it go and say I can't make it any better at this time, or?
That's all up to you.
You just have to have confidence in your choices. maybe you're just sick of the thing. Who you know? I mean, honestly, if maybe you're sick of it and you've done 20 drafts and maybe it's good, maybe it's not. It's time to move on. You can always come back to it later.
Yes.
You mentioned another earlier. In addition to the 10% solution, you mentioned another program, and I like to hear the name of it again. I also want to throw out the words "read, please," as a computer program that you feed your text into and it reads it back to you. And before I send it to my editor, it goes through until I can get through it and hear it without having to change anything.
But the inflection and the tone is correct when they do it. I'm always wary about those types of programs.
Yeah, that's one. And your question about what was your question again? You. Yeah.
How to know when you're finished. When to let it go.
When to let it go. Eric Flint, 1632, was published. He got 1,500 letters from professional snipers about Julie Sims shooting in a particular way on the hardcover book, and he put the correction in the softcover.
So the program was Word Web?
No, Word Web. Thank
Word
you.
Web. We'll take one more question and we'll wrap it up. Yes.
Would you ever pay money to a professional editor to help you with your manuscript?
That's a good question.
Personally,
You can start, Jeff.
I've only got a one-word answer. I'm not qualified to answer that.
Personally, I would not. I know that my work is never perfect. Even after going over it 10 times and other people going over it 10 times, there's still typos. Accepting a little bit of human error is part of the job. It all depends on how comfortable you are with your own skills and or what other people are telling you. Some people just purely can't see them. If you're one of those people, if you have a little bit of dyslexia or whatever, work with what you've got.
I would do it just because you have to have your heart in the right place. You have to not want the editor to fix it for you. If that's your goal, then you're not going to learn anything, and chances are you're going to disagree with a lot of the changes, and it's just a wasted however many dollars you spend. But if you see it as an exercise to learn more about your writing and yourself, maybe, and if the editor is a very good one, there's a lot of lousy ones out there, then I would say if you feel it's necessary, I would go ahead.
Personally, I wouldn't, but that's not because I just don't feel the need for me to do that. My agent does that for me, and she does an exceptionally good job. However, that said, there are very good editors out there. I know some that have recently set up business that would be excellent. The advice I would give to you is choose an editor that has a track record, if you can find one with one, and also one who edits your genre.
And then if you've got good beta readers, you don't need one. If you haven't found someone that's going to give you that commentary that you're going to take 4 pages of notes, and that's how I knew I had found a good beta reader, when this person talked to me for 45 minutes as if my characters were real people, and I was taking notes madly while she was talking. That's how I knew I had found someone that was really cared about what I had written. If you don't have that person, you may need to go shopping for an editor.
All right. Well, thank you, fellow panelists. It was great to meet a couple new ones. Thank you, everyone, for turning out, and have a great afternoon.